My wife said the family trip was canceled due to lack of money. I believed her. That weekend, I saw her brother's Instagram post, "Dinner with my brother-in-law at Heart." And there she was, with her lover. When she later asked for $8,000, I replied, "Ask your lover. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Thomas, and at 66 years old, I thought I knew everything there was to know about my wife of 40 years. I was wrong. It was a Saturday morning in early October when my world quietly shattered. Melissa had announced the night before that our annual family vacation to Hilton Head was canceled. "Money's tight this year, honey," she said, not even looking up from her phone. "We should stay home and be responsible." I nodded like I always did. Melissa handled our social calendar, our family plans, our everything really. I was the provider, the one who worked overtime on weekends to keep our comfortable lifestyle intact. At 66, I still put in 50-hour weeks at the accounting firm, while she managed our home and, apparently, our finances. "You're probably right," I told her, though inside I felt a familiar pang of disappointment. These family trips were one of the few times I felt truly connected to our children and grandchildren. But if money was tight, it was tight. I trusted her judgment completely. Saturday morning, I kissed her goodbye and headed to the office. "I'll probably be here until evening," I said. "The Henderson account needs to be finished before Monday." She barely acknowledged me, already scrolling through her phone again. The office was quiet, just me and a few other dedicated souls grinding through spreadsheets and tax documents. Around 2 in the afternoon, I decided to take a quick break and check social media. I rarely posted anything myself, but I liked seeing photos of our kids and grandchildren. That's when I saw it. Melissa's brother Jake had posted a photo from what looked like an expensive steakhouse. The caption read, "Great night out with my sister and my brother-in-law of the Heart." The image showed Jake raising a wine glass, grinning broadly. Next to him sat Melissa, radiant in a dress I'd never seen before, and beside her was a man I didn't recognize, a man who definitely wasn't me. The man had his arm casually draped around my wife's shoulders. She was leaning into him, laughing at something he'd whispered in her ear. Her left hand, the one with our wedding ring, was placed intimately on his chest. I stared at the screen for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. My hands started shaking so badly I had to set my phone down on the desk. The Henderson account spreadsheet blurred in front of me as my eyes filled with tears I refused to let fall. Brother-in-law of the Heart. Not brother-in-law. Brother-in-law of the Heart. The phrase echoed in my mind as I tried to process what I was seeing. This wasn't some innocent family dinner. This was my wife, the woman I'd worked myself to exhaustion for decades to provide for, out with another man while I sat alone in an empty office on a Saturday afternoon. I picked up my phone again with trembling fingers and studied the photo more carefully. The restaurant looked expensive, the kind of place that would cost at least $200 for 3 people. Melissa was wearing jewelry I didn't recognize, diamond earrings that caught the light, a gold bracelet that looked substantial and costly. Money was tight, she'd said. Too tight for our family vacation that would have cost us maybe $1,500 total, but apparently not too tight for expensive dinners and new jewelry. I scrolled through Jake's other recent posts. There were several photos from the past few months showing him, Melissa, and this same man at various locations. A wine tasting event, an art gallery opening, a charity gala, all events that Melissa had attended, according to these photos, but had never mentioned to me. The man appeared comfortable, familiar with both Jake and Melissa. In one photo, he and Melissa were dancing. In another, he was helping her into a coat. These weren't the actions of someone she'd just met. This was a relationship that had been developing for months, possibly longer. I thought about all the evenings Melissa had been out with girlfriends or helping Jake with something. All the times she'd seemed distant, distracted, almost irritated by my presence. All the times she'd encouraged me to work late or take on weekend projects. Had she been relieved every time I left for the office? Had she been counting the minutes until I was gone so she could live this other life? The worst part wasn't even the betrayal itself. It was the calculation of it all. She hadn't just fallen for someone else in a moment of weakness. She had systematically built an entire secret relationship while maintaining the facade of our marriage. She had looked me in the eye and lied about money being tight while spending freely on this other man. She had made me feel guilty for wanting to take our family vacation while she was out living it up without me. I closed the social media app and sat in the silence of the empty office. Outside, I could hear the distant sounds of Saturday afternoon, families spending time together, couples enjoying their weekend, people living authentic lives with people who actually cared about them. For 40 years, I had believed I was part of something real, a partnership, a team. I had worked every weekend, taken on every difficult client, said yes to every overtime opportunity because I thought I was building something with Melissa. I thought we were saving for our future together, creating a legacy for our children, building a life that mattered. But while I was building our life, she was apparently building a completely different one with someone else. I should have been angry. I should have been furious. Instead, I felt hollow, like someone had reached inside my chest and removed something essential. The man in those photos with my wife looked confident, relaxed, successful. He looked like someone who had never spent a Saturday afternoon alone in an empty office, working to pay for a life he wasn't even really part of. I gathered my papers and prepared to leave the office early for the first time in months. As I drove home through the quiet suburban streets, I wondered if Melissa was back yet. I wondered if she would ask about my day, pretend to care about the Henderson account, maintain the charade that had apparently been running for months or years. Most of all, I wondered if the man I'd been for the past 40 years, the devoted husband, the tireless provider, the man who never questioned and always trusted, was about to disappear forever. I didn't confront Melissa that Saturday night. When I got home, she was already there, acting perfectly normal, asking about my day as if she hadn't spent the afternoon with another man at an expensive restaurant. I watched her move around our kitchen, preparing dinner with the same casual efficiency she'd shown for decades, and marveled at how easily deception seemed to come to her. "How was the office?" she asked, not really listening for an answer. "Fine," I said, studying her face for any sign of guilt or nervousness. There was none. She looked relaxed, even happy, more animated than she'd been with me in months. That night, as she slept peacefully beside me, I stared at the ceiling and replayed every interaction we'd had over the past year. How many lies had I missed? How many times had she come home from being with him and climbed into bed next to me without a second thought? Sunday passed in a blur of forced normalcy. Melissa was cheerful, chatty even, telling me about her plans for the week. Lunch with her sister on Tuesday. A book club meeting on Thursday. All activities that now seemed suspect. Potential cover stories for time spent with her lover. The call came on Monday evening. I was reviewing quarterly reports when my phone rang. Melissa's name appeared on the screen. "Thomas, honey, I need to ask you for a favor." Her voice had that sweet, cajoling tone she used when she wanted something expensive. "What kind of favor?" I kept my voice neutral, though my heart was already racing. "Well, you know how my cousin Sarah has been going through that awful divorce." She didn't wait for me to respond. "Her lawyer is demanding a retainer and she's completely broke. She needs $8,000 by Wednesday, or she'll have to represent herself against that horrible man. $8,000, a substantial sum, but not impossible for us to manage." Under normal circumstances, I would have agreed immediately. Melissa's family had always been important to her, and I'd supported them financially many times over the years. But these weren't normal circumstances. "That's a lot of money, Melissa," I said carefully. "I know, but she's desperate. She said she'll pay us back as soon as the divorce settlement comes through. You know Sarah's good for it." I knew no such thing. Sarah had borrowed money from us twice before and never repaid a cent. But that wasn't the point. The point was that less than 2 days ago, Melissa had told me money was too tight for our family vacation. Now she wanted to hand $8,000 to a cousin who had a track record of not paying us back. "Melissa," I said, my voice calmer than I felt, "didn't you just tell me we needed to tighten our belts? That we couldn't afford our trip to Hilton Head?" There was a brief pause. "Well, yes, but this is different. This is an emergency. Sarah really needs our help, and our family vacation wasn't important." Another pause, longer this time. "Thomas, that's not fair. Sarah is in crisis. We can take a vacation anytime." The casual dismissal of something that mattered to me, something I'd been looking forward to for months, crystallized everything I'd been feeling since Saturday afternoon. For 40 years, I had prioritized everyone else's needs above my own. I had worked extra hours to pay for Melissa's shopping trips, her family's emergencies, her endless list of wants and needs. I had never questioned where the money went or whether we could afford it. I had been the automatic yes to every request, the reliable source of funding for everyone else's dreams while my own remained perpetually deferred. Not anymore. No, I said quietly. What? I said no. We're not giving Sarah $8,000. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long, I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, Melissa spoke, her voice sharp with disbelief. What do you mean, no? Thomas, she's family. So am I replied. Or at least, I thought I was. What's that supposed to mean? I took a deep breath. This was it. The moment of truth that I'd been avoiding since Saturday afternoon. It means if Sarah needs $8,000, she should ask her brother-in-law of the heart. The silence that followed was deafening. I could practically hear Melissa's mind racing, trying to figure out how much I knew and how much I was guessing. Thomas, she finally said, her voice carefully controlled. I don't know what you're talking about. Jake's Instagram post, I said simply. Saturday night, expensive restaurant, new jewelry, brother-in-law of the heart. More silence. Then incredibly she tried to brazen it out. You're being ridiculous. Jake calls lots of people that. It doesn't mean anything. But her voice had changed. The confident, cajoling tone was gone, replaced by something harder, more defensive, the tone of someone who'd been caught and was scrambling for cover. Melissa, I said, and my voice was steady now, resolve settling over me like armor. If you need $8,000, ask your brother-in-law of the heart. I'm sure he'll be happy to help. Thomas, wait. I hung up. I set my phone down on my desk and sat back in my chair. My hands weren't shaking anymore. The hollow feeling in my chest had been replaced by something else. Not anger exactly, but a cold, clear certainty that the man I'd been for the past 40 years was indeed gone forever. The phone immediately started ringing again. Melissa's name flashed on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again and again. After the 5th call, I turned the phone off completely. For the first time in decades, I had said no to my wife and meant it. I had drawn a line in the sand and refused to cross it. The feeling was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. I thought about the $8,000 Melissa wanted. Money that would probably end up funding more expensive dinners, more jewelry, more of the secret life she'd been building while I worked to pay for it. Money that she felt entitled to simply because she'd always been able to count on my automatic compliance. Not this time. I opened my laptop and began transferring money from our joint checking account to my personal savings account. Not all of it. I wasn't a thief, but enough to ensure that any future $8,000 requests would require my explicit approval. As I worked, I found myself thinking about the man in the photographs. Did he know he was with a married woman? Did he care? Was he wealthy enough to support the lifestyle Melissa had become accustomed to, or was he counting on me to continue funding their relationship? The questions multiplied in my mind, but underneath them all was a growing sense of clarity. I had spent 40 years being the man everyone could count on, the one who never said no, never questioned, never demanded anything for himself. I had been so busy being indispensable that I'd forgotten to ask whether I was actually valued. The answer, it seemed, was no. But that was about to change. Melissa arrived home 20 minutes after I hung up on her. I heard her car in the driveway, the familiar sound of her heels clicking rapidly across the garage floor. She burst through the kitchen door like a woman on a mission, her face flushed with what looked like panic barely held in check. Thomas, we need to talk. Her voice was sharp, demanding. The sweet, cajoling tone from earlier had vanished completely. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, feeling strangely calm. Yes, I think we do. She pulled out the chair across from me and sat down heavily. For a moment, we just stared at each other. 40 years of marriage, and I felt like I was looking at a stranger. I don't know what you think you saw, she began. I saw my wife having dinner with another man while I worked alone in my office on a Saturday night, I interrupted. I saw her wearing jewelry I've never seen before, laughing and being intimate with someone who isn't her husband. I saw her brother calling this man his brother-in-law of the heart. Melissa's face went pale. Thomas, it's not what you think. Then explain it to me. Explain why you told me we couldn't afford a $1,500 family vacation, but you could afford dinner at Morton's. Explain the jewelry. Explain why Jake considers this man family. She opened her mouth, then closed it. I could see her mind working, trying to find a version of the truth that wouldn't destroy everything. "He's just a friend," she finally said. "Someone Jake introduced me to. We have dinner sometimes, but it's completely innocent." "Innocent," I repeated the word slowly. "And you never mentioned this friend because I knew you'd react exactly like this. You're jealous and possessive, Thomas. You always have been." The accusation hit me like a slap. In 40 years of marriage, I had never once questioned her about where she went or who she saw. I had trusted her completely, never demanded explanations, never checked up on her. If that was possessive, then I clearly didn't understand the word. I'm possessive. I stood up and walked to the kitchen counter, retrieving my phone. "Let me show you something." I pulled up Jake's Instagram account and scrolled through the photos from the past 6 months. There were dozens of them. Melissa and her friend at various events, always looking comfortable together, always touching in ways that married women don't typically touch male friends. "June 15th, I said, showing her a photo. "Wine tasting in Napa. You told me you were visiting your sister in Sacramento." Her face went even paler. "July 4th, art gallery opening downtown. You said you were helping Jake with his apartment." "August 20th, charity gala at the Ritz-Carlton. You said you had food poisoning and couldn't go to our grandson's birthday party." I kept scrolling, kept showing her the evidence of her lies. With each photo, I watched her carefully constructed denials crumble. "September 10th. Dinner at Le Bernardin. You said you were at book club." "Thomas, stop." Her voice was barely a whisper. "September 25th. Dancing at the Fairmont Hotel. You said you were having a quiet night with Sarah. Please, just stop." I set the phone down and looked at her. She was crying now, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of someone who'd been caught and was facing consequences for the first time. "How long?" I asked quietly. She didn't answer immediately. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and seemed to be weighing her options. 2 years, she finally whispered. 2 years, 730 days of lies, of coming home to me after being with him, of looking me in the eye every morning and pretending to be my faithful wife. "And the money?" I asked. "All those dinners, the jewelry, the events, who paid for it?" Her silence was answer enough. I walked to my desk and pulled out the file where I kept our financial records. I had been meticulous about our expenses for decades, tracking every dollar to ensure we stayed within budget and saved for retirement. "Let me guess," I said, flipping through the statements. "The $3,000 withdrawal in June was for a romantic weekend getaway. The $1,500 jewelry purchase in July was a gift for your lover. The $800 dinner bill in August was celebrating some milestone in your relationship." "You don't understand," she said, her voice gaining strength. "You work all the time. You never want to do anything fun. You're boring, Thomas. When was the last time you took me dancing? When was the last time you surprised me with jewelry?" The blame shifting was breathtaking. She had been systematically stealing from our joint account to fund an affair, and somehow this was my fault for working too much. "I work to support us," I said evenly. "To support the lifestyle you enjoy. The house you live in, the car you drive, the clothes you wear, the vacations we take. All of it comes from my boring work." "But that's all you do. Work, work, work. You never talk to me anymore. You don't see me as a woman, just as someone to cook your meals and manage your schedule." I stared at her, amazed. "So you found someone who does see you as a woman, someone who takes you dancing and buys you jewelry and makes you feel special. And I paid for it all. It's not about the money." "It's exactly about the money, Melissa. If it wasn't about the money, you would have left me 2 years ago. Instead, you kept me around to fund your affair while you built a relationship with someone else." She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "That's not true. I never meant for this to happen. David is he makes me feel alive again." David. So now he had a name. And what was I supposed to make you feel? What was the point of our marriage if you needed David to feel alive? "I don't know," she shouted. "I don't know, okay? I was unhappy, and he was there. And he paid attention to me. He listens when I talk. He remembers things I tell him. He makes me laugh." Each word was like a knife. She was describing everything I had apparently failed to be, everything that had driven her into the arms of another man. "So why didn't you just divorce me?" I asked. "Why the lies? Why the deception?" She looked away, unable to meet my eyes. Because David couldn't afford to support you the way I can," I finished for her. Because you wanted the security of my income and the excitement of his attention. You wanted it all. That's not fair. Fair? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You think what you've done to me is fair? You think lying to me for 2 years while spending our money on another man is fair? She started crying again, harder this time. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Thomas. I never meant to hurt you. But even as she apologized, I could see her mind working. She wasn't sorry she'd had the affair. She was sorry she'd been caught. There was a difference, and we both knew it. Where do we go from here? I asked. She looked up at me with hope in her eyes. We can work through this. Marriage counseling. I'll break it off with David. We can start over. I studied her face, looking for any sign that she meant what she was saying. But all I saw was calculation. She was already figuring out how to manage this crisis, how to minimize the damage, how to keep her comfortable life intact while making the smallest possible sacrifice. Will you? I asked quietly. Will you really break it off with David? Yes, she said immediately. Absolutely. It was a mistake, a terrible mistake. A 2-year mistake that you funded with my money while lying to my face every single day. Her expression hardened slightly. I said I was sorry. What more do you want? What more did I want? I wanted my wife back. I wanted the woman I'd married 40 years ago, the one who would have been horrified at the thought of betraying me this way. I wanted the marriage I thought I'd had, built on trust and commitment and shared dreams. But that marriage had never existed. It had been a carefully maintained illusion, and now that the illusion was shattered, there was nothing left to save. The phone calls started the next morning. Word had apparently traveled fast through Melissa's family network, though I suspected the version they heard bore little resemblance to the truth. Sarah was the first to call. Uncle Thomas, I heard about the misunderstanding with Mom. She's really upset. Uncle Thomas, I'd been supporting Sarah financially for years, but apparently I was just Uncle Thomas when it suited her. It's not a misunderstanding, Sarah, I said calmly. Your mother has been having an affair for 2 years. That's not... Mom says you're being paranoid. She says David is just a friend. A friend she's been secretly dating for 2 years while using my money to pay for their relationship. There was a long pause. Dad always said you were controlling. Dad. That would be Melissa's brother Jake, the same Jake who had been posting photos of Melissa and David for months, the same Jake who called David his brother-in-law of the heart. Sarah, I said carefully, did you know about David? Another pause. I knew Mom had been happier lately. She seemed more alive, but I didn't think. She was lying. They all knew. The entire family had known about Melissa's affair and had said nothing to me. More than that, they had actively participated in covering it up. How long have you known? I asked. Uncle Thomas, I can't. This is between you and Mom. No, Sarah, this involves all of you. Every family gathering where David was discussed. Every lie you helped cover up. Every time you stayed silent while I unknowingly funded their relationship. You're all complicit. She hung up without another word. The next call came from our older son, Michael. He was 38, married with 2 children of his own, and had always been closer to his mother than to me. Dad, what the hell is going on? Mom called me in tears saying you're threatening to divorce her over some imaginary affair. It's not imaginary, Michael. I have photographic evidence going back months. Photos can be misleading. Mom says this David guy is just a friend of Uncle Jake's. She says you're being paranoid and jealous. I felt a familiar weariness settle over me. Even my own children were choosing to believe Melissa's version of events rather than considering that I might be telling the truth. Michael, your mother has been lying to me for 2 years. She's been using our money to fund a relationship with another man while telling me we can't afford family vacations. Look, Dad, even if she did, step out a little. Marriage is complicated. People make mistakes. You can't just throw away 40 years over one error in judgment. Step out a little, one error in judgment. My son was minimizing his mother's systematic betrayal as if it were a minor indiscretion. Would you be this understanding if Jessica did this to you? I asked, referring to his wife. That's different. Jessica and I are younger. We have young kids. You and Mom are past all that drama. Past all that drama. As if reaching 66 meant I no longer deserved fidelity or honesty from my spouse. I see, I said quietly. So at my age, I should just accept being cheated on because I'm too old to expect better. That's not what I meant, Dad. I just think you're overreacting. Mom made a mistake. She's sorry. Can't you forgive her and move on? Has she told David she's sorry? Has she ended the relationship? I don't know. but I'm sure she will if you ask her to. If I ask her to. Not because she wants to make amends, but because I've requested it. As if ending an affair were a favor she might grant me if I asked politely enough. Michael, I said slowly, did you know about David? The silence stretched long enough to answer my question. I suspected Mom was happier lately, he finally admitted. She seemed more energetic, more interested in things. I thought maybe she'd found a new hobby or something. Another lie by omission. Another family member who had chosen to look the other way rather than protect me from being made a fool of. Our younger son, Robert, called that afternoon. At 35, he had always been more direct than his brother, less diplomatic. Dad, I just got off the phone with Michael. He says you're planning to divorce Mom. I'm considering it, yes. Over this David thing. Over the fact that your mother has been cheating on me for 2 years while using my money to finance the affair. Robert was quiet for a moment. Yeah, I know about David. At least he was honest about it. How long have you known? About a year, maybe longer. I saw them together at a restaurant downtown. Mom made me promise not to tell you, and you kept that promise. Dad, I was in an impossible position. She's my mother. She said she was unhappy and that David made her feel appreciated. She said you two had grown apart, and that she needed someone who understood her. So you helped her lie to me. I didn't help her do anything. I didn't say anything, which is the same thing. Look, Dad, I get that you're hurt, but Mom's not a bad person. She just made some bad choices. Maybe if you two went to counseling. Robert, she's been stealing money from our joint account to pay for dates with her lover. How is that not being a bad person? I didn't know about the money part, but he didn't sound surprised by it either. The worst call came from Melissa's sister, Patricia. She didn't bother with pleasantries. Thomas, Melissa told me about your little tantrum. You need to get over yourself. Excuse me? You heard me. So Melissa found someone who makes her happy. So what? You've been neglecting her for years. You work all the time. You never take her anywhere fun. You're boring as dirt. What did you expect? The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. I work to support her, Patricia. To support all of you when you need it. Right. And we're all supposed to be grateful that you throw money at us instead of actually being present. Melissa deserves better than that. She deserves better than a faithful husband who's worked his entire adult life to provide for her. She deserves a husband who sees her as more than a housekeeper and accountant. David treats her like a queen. He listens to her, he takes her places, he makes her feel beautiful. With my money. Oh, please, you act like Melissa's some kind of criminal. She's a woman who fell in love. It happens. She fell in love while married to me, while lying to me, while spending my money on him. Thomas, you're 66 years old. Did you really think you could keep a vibrant woman like Melissa satisfied forever? She's 58, not 90. She still has needs. The implication was clear. I was too old, too boring, too inadequate to meet my wife's needs. Her affair wasn't a betrayal. It was a natural consequence of my failure as a husband. I see, I said. So this is my fault. I'm not saying it's your fault. I'm saying it's reality. Melissa isn't the first woman to find companionship outside a stale marriage, and she won't be the last. The question is whether you're mature enough to handle it like an adult. Handle it like an adult. Accept being cheated on with grace and dignity. And what would handling it like an adult look like, Patricia? You could start by apologizing for embarrassing her. Then you could have a civilized conversation about how to move forward. Maybe you could even learn something from David about how to treat a woman. I hung up without responding. That evening, Melissa came home with red, swollen eyes and a defeated posture. She'd clearly spent the day working the phones, rallying support, managing the narrative. But something had changed. The defiance from the night before was gone, replaced by what looked like genuine distress. I talked to the kids, she said quietly, settling into the chair across from me. I know. They called me too. They think we should try to work this out. They think I should forgive you and pretend this never happened. She winced. Thomas, I know I've hurt you. I know I've made terrible mistakes. But we have 40 years together. We have children and grandchildren. Doesn't that count for something? It counted for something when I thought it was real. Now I know it was just me living a lie while you lived your authentic life with someone else. That's not true. My life with you wasn't a lie. Then why did you need David? She stared at her hands for a long moment. Because you stopped seeing me, really seeing me. I became invisible to you, Thomas. Just another responsibility to manage, another expense to cover. So you found someone who saw you. Yes, and you used my money to make yourself visible to him. Her face crumpled. I know how that sounds. I know how wrong it was. But I felt so alone in this marriage, Thomas. So unappreciated. David made me feel alive again. At my expense. Literally. I'll pay back every penny. I'll get a job. I'll sell my jewelry, whatever it takes. I looked at her, this woman I'd shared my life with for 4 decades, and felt nothing but sadness. Not anger anymore, not betrayal, just a deep, bone-deep sadness for what we'd lost, or maybe for what we'd never really had. Melissa, I said quietly, it's not about the money. It's about the fact that everyone knew except me. Your family, our children, even strangers at restaurants who saw you together. I was the only one living in the dark. I never meant for it to go on so long. I kept thinking I'd end it, but David was more interesting than I was. She didn't deny it. The next morning I did something I hadn't done in 30 years. I called in sick to work. Not because I was physically ill, but because I needed time to think, to plan, to figure out who I was going to be now that the foundation of my life had crumbled. I made myself coffee and sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, methodically going through our financial records. If I was going to make decisions about my future, I needed to understand exactly where we stood financially. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. Over the past 2 years, Melissa had withdrawn nearly $43,000 from our joint accounts. Some withdrawals were large and obvious. The $3,000 weekend getaway, the $5,000 jewelry purchase. Others were smaller but more frequent, $200 here, $500 there, always with vague explanations like miscellaneous expenses or personal items. I cross-referenced the withdrawals with Jake's Instagram posts and found a disturbing pattern. Every romantic dinner, every art gallery opening, every charity gala corresponded with a withdrawal from our account. I had been unknowingly funding my wife's courtship with another man for 2 years, but the money was just the beginning. I opened Melissa's laptop, something I'd never done in 40 years of marriage, and found a treasure trove of evidence that painted a picture of systematic deception that went far beyond what I'd already discovered. There were email chains between Melissa and her sister Patricia discussing Tom's suspicious behavior and strategies for keeping him in the dark. There were text messages with Sarah about borrowing money from me to cover expenses related to David. There were conversations with our sons about how to manage Dad if he ever found out. They had all been conspiring against me, not just enabling Melissa's affair, but actively working to ensure I remained ignorant while they laughed at my expense. The most devastating discovery was a series of emails between Melissa and David discussing their future together. They had been planning to wait until I turned 70 and retired. Then Melissa would divorce me and take half of everything in the settlement. David, it turned out, was recently divorced himself and struggling financially. He needed Melissa's share of my assets to start fresh. I wasn't just a convenient source of funding for their affair. I was their retirement plan. The phone rang while I was reading through the emails. It was Robert. Dad, I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday. Maybe we could all sit down together and figure this out. Figure what out, Robert? How to move forward as a family. Mom made mistakes, but she's still our mother. And you're still our father. We can't just throw all that away. I closed the laptop and rubbed my temples. Robert, did you know your mother and David were planning to wait until I retired to divorce me? Silence on the other end. Did you know they were planning to take half my assets and start a new life together? Dad, Where did you hear that? From your mother's emails. She's been planning this for months, Robert. The affair isn't a mistake or a moment of weakness. It's been a carefully orchestrated plan to use me until I'm no longer useful, then discard me. That doesn't sound like Mom, doesn't it? She's been lying to my face for 2 years while spending my money on another man. She convinced our entire family to help her maintain the deception. How is planning to divorce me any different from what she's already done? Robert was quiet for a long moment. Maybe the emails are taken out of context. Robert, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I want a direct answer. If someone treated Jessica the way your mother has treated me, what would you advise her to do? Another long pause. I'd tell her to leave. Then why are you advising me to stay? Because you're my parents. Because divorce at your age is complicated. Because maybe there's still a chance to fix things. The chance to fix things was 2 years ago before your mother started her affair, or 1 year ago when you saw them together and could have told me, or 6 months ago when she was planning to divorce me anyway. The time for fixing things has passed. I hung up and made my second call of the day to Martin Hughes, the best divorce attorney in the city. I'd known Martin professionally for years. He handled the legal work for several of my clients, but I'd never imagined I'd need his services personally. "Thomas," Martin said when his secretary put me through, "this is a surprise. What can I do for you?" "I need to discuss divorce proceedings." There was a pause. "I'm sorry to hear that. How long have you been married?" 40 years next month. That's a long time. Are you sure this is what you want?" I thought about the emails, the systematic deception, the family conspiracy, the plans to take half my assets and abandon me. "I'm sure." The meeting with Martin was enlightening in ways I hadn't expected. Under Texas law, I learned, adultery was still grounds for divorce, and the evidence I'd gathered was more than sufficient to prove Melissa's infidelity. More importantly, her use of marital funds to support her affair could be considered waste of community assets, which might entitle me to a larger share of our property in the settlement. "The emails discussing future divorce plans are particularly damaging," Martin explained. "They show premeditation and bad faith. A judge would likely view that very unfavorably." "What about the money she spent on the affair?" "We can demand an accounting of every dollar and seek reimbursement. If she can't pay it back, it comes out of her share of the settlement." I left Martin's office feeling something I hadn't felt in weeks: control. For the first time since discovering the affair, I wasn't reacting to Melissa's choices. I was making my own. That evening, Melissa was waiting for me when I got home. She'd clearly been crying, and she looked smaller somehow, diminished. "Thomas, we need to talk," she said. "Yes, we do." I sat down across from her and pulled out a folder containing copies of the emails I'd found on her laptop. "I've been doing some reading," I said, placing the folder on the table between us. Her face went white when she saw the first page. "Thomas, I can explain. You and David were planning to wait until I retired to divorce me. Those emails, they're not what they look like. You discussed taking half my assets to start a new life with him. We were just talking. People say things they don't mean when they're confused. You calculated the value of my pension and retirement accounts." She was crying now, but I felt no sympathy. These weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of someone whose carefully laid plans had been discovered. "Melissa, you weren't having an affair. You were conducting a business transaction. I was the asset to be liquidated." "That's not true. I love you, Thomas. I've always loved you. You love my money. You love the security I provide. You love having a reliable source of funding for your real life with David. Please don't say that. Yes, I made terrible mistakes, but I never stopped loving you." I leaned back in my chair and studied her face. Even now, caught red-handed with documentary evidence of her plans to betray me, she was still trying to manipulate me with declarations of love. "Melissa, if you loved me, you wouldn't have spent 2 years lying to me. If you loved me, you wouldn't have used my money to court another man. If you loved me, you wouldn't have planned to divorce me the moment I stopped being useful to you." I was confused. I was unhappy. I made bad choices, but that doesn't mean I stopped loving you. Yes, it does. Love doesn't behave the way you've behaved. Love doesn't systematically deceive and steal and plan abandonment. What you feel for me isn't love, Melissa. It's convenience. She reached across the table and tried to take my hand. I pulled it away. "Thomas, please, we can fix this. I'll end things with David. I'll do whatever it takes to earn your trust back." "Will you? Will you really end things with David?" "Yes, absolutely. I'll call him right now and tell him it's over." I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table. "Go ahead." She stared at the phone, then at me. "Right now. Right now. Call David and tell him you're ending the relationship because you want to save your marriage." Her hand hovered over the phone, trembling slightly. The seconds stretched into minutes. I need time to think about how to say it. I don't want to hurt him unnecessarily." And there it was. Even faced with losing everything, she was still more concerned about David's feelings than mine. "You don't want to hurt him unnecessarily," I repeated slowly. "But you're perfectly comfortable with the pain you've caused me. That's different. You're stronger than he is. You can handle this better." "I see." So I should accept being betrayed because I'm strong enough to handle it, but David needs to be protected from the consequences of his actions because he's more fragile. You're twisting my words. I'm repeating them exactly. I stood up and gathered the emails back into the folder. Melissa, I've filed for divorce. You'll be served with papers tomorrow morning. The color drained from her face completely. Thomas, no, please don't do this. We can work through this. We can't work through this because you don't want to work through this. You want to manage this. You want to minimize the damage to yourself while changing as little as possible about your actual behavior. That's not true. Then call David, right now. End it. Again, she stared at the phone without moving. I thought so, I said quietly. You're not willing to give him up, even to save our marriage. That tells me everything I need to know about where your priorities lie. I walked toward the stairs, then turned back. By the way, I've frozen our joint accounts. If you need money, you'll have to ask David for it. For the first time in 40 years, I went to bed feeling like I was finally telling the truth about my life. The divorce process took 8 months. 8 months of depositions, financial disclosures, and uncomfortable family gatherings where everyone pretended things might still work out. 8 months of Melissa alternating between tearful apologies and bitter accusations, depending on which strategy her lawyer recommended that week. But I had documentation. I had emails, bank records, photographs, and a paper trail that told the complete story of systematic deception. Most importantly, I had resolve. The man who had automatically said yes to everyone's demands for 40 years had learned to say no, and I wasn't going back. Martin proved to be worth every penny of his substantial fee. The court awarded me 70% of our assets, citing Melissa's adultery and waste of marital funds. She was ordered to repay the $43,000 she'd spent on David, though we both knew she'd never have that kind of money. The house was mine. The retirement accounts were mostly mine. The investment portfolio we'd built over 4 decades was split heavily in my favor. Melissa walked away with enough to live modestly, but the comfortable lifestyle she'd enjoyed as my wife was over. More importantly, the truth was finally out. There were no more family conspiracies, no more secret phone calls, no more elaborate deceptions. Everyone knew exactly what had happened and who was responsible. The reactions were illuminating. Michael tried to maintain his position that I was being vindictive. Dad, you got what you wanted. Mom's been punished enough. Can't we just move on now? But Robert surprised me. Dad, I owe you an apology. I should have told you about David from the beginning. I was trying to protect Mom, but I ended up helping her hurt you worse. You were in an impossible position, I told him. I don't blame you for being loyal to your mother. I should have been loyal to the truth, he said. And the truth was that what she was doing was wrong. Sarah, surprisingly, was the most bitter about the outcome. Uncle Thomas, you destroyed our family. Mom's living in a tiny apartment now, working at a department store. Was your pride really worth all that? Sarah, I said calmly, your mother destroyed our family when she decided to have an affair. I just stopped paying for the destruction. Melissa's family largely cut me off, which was actually a relief. Patricia sent me one final message. I hope you're happy, Thomas. You've ruined a good woman's life over jealousy and spite. I didn't respond. There was no point in trying to explain that I hadn't ruined Melissa's life. I'd simply stopped subsidizing the life she'd chosen to build with someone else. The most interesting development came 6 months after the divorce was finalized. Robert called me on a Saturday morning, his voice carefully neutral. Dad, I thought you should know. Mom and David broke up. I wasn't surprised. David had been attracted to the lifestyle Melissa could provide with access to my income. Without that income, she was just another middle-aged woman with limited financial resources. How is she handling it? I asked. Not well. She keeps saying this is all your fault, that David would have stayed if you hadn't been so vindictive about the money. Even in loss, Melissa couldn't accept responsibility for her choices. It was my fault for not continuing to fund her affair even after divorce. What about you? Robert asked. How are you doing? It was a good question. For 40 years, my identity had been wrapped up in being a husband, a provider, a man whose worth was measured by how well he took care of everyone else's needs. Without that role, I'd had to figure out who Thomas actually was. The answer surprised me. I was sleeping better than I had in years. Without the constant stress of wondering why Melissa seemed distant or irritated, without the weight of working extra hours to fund a lifestyle that included expenses I didn't understand, I felt lighter. Younger even. I'd started doing things I'd always wanted to try but never had time for. I took a photography class and discovered I had a genuine talent for it. I joined a hiking group and found myself making friends with people who knew nothing about my complicated family history. I traveled to places Melissa had never shown interest in visiting. Most surprisingly, I started dating. Her name was Carol, and she was a widow I'd met in the photography class. She was 62, retired from teaching, with grown children who lived across the country. She had her own house, her own income, her own life. She didn't need me to take care of her, and I didn't need her to validate my worth as a person. We enjoyed each other's company. We shared interests and values. We were building something based on mutual respect and genuine affection, without financial dependencies or family obligations complicating every decision. "I like this version of you," she told me one evening as we sat on her porch watching the sunset. "You seem comfortable with yourself in a way that's attractive." "I'm still figuring out who this version of me is," I admitted. "Well, I like what I see so far." For the first time in decades, I was in a relationship where I felt valued for who I was, rather than what I could provide. Carol paid for her own dinners, bought her own gifts, made her own decisions about how to spend her time and money. If she wanted to be with me, it was because she enjoyed my company, not because she needed my financial support. It was revolutionary. A year after the divorce, I received an unexpected phone call from Jake, Melissa's brother. The same Jake who had posted the photos that started this whole revelation. "Thomas, I owe you an apology," he said without preamble. "For what?" "For going along with Melissa's lies. For posting those pictures without thinking about how they might affect you. For treating you like an outsider in your own family." I was quiet for a moment, surprised by his honesty. "I thought you believed David was better for her than I was." "Maybe he was in some ways, but that didn't give her the right to lie to you for 2 years while spending your money on him. That was wrong, and I should have told her so." "Why didn't you?" "Because it was easier to go along with it than to deal with the drama of confronting her. But watching how everything fell apart, seeing how bitter she's become, I realize now that we didn't do her any favors by enabling her deception. It was the closest thing to validation I'd received from anyone in Melissa's family." "How is she doing?" I asked. "Honestly, not well. She's angry all the time." "Angry at you, angry at David, angry at everyone who isn't fixing her problems for her. She keeps waiting for someone to rescue her, but she's burned too many bridges." "I'm sorry to hear that." "Are you? Really?" I thought about it honestly. "Yes, I am. I never wanted her to be miserable. I just wanted her to be honest." "Well, for what it's worth, I think you did the right thing. It took courage to walk away from 40 years of marriage, especially when everyone was telling you to just accept the situation." After I hung up, I sat in my study looking through the photo albums from our early years together. There were pictures of Melissa and me as newlyweds, young and hopeful and apparently in love. Pictures of us with baby Michael, then baby Robert, family vacations, holiday celebrations, milestone anniversaries. I wondered if those moments had been real, or if I'd been living in a fantasy even then. Had Melissa ever loved me the way I loved her, or had I always been more useful than beloved? It didn't matter anymore. The person in those photographs, the eager-to-please young man who defined himself entirely through his usefulness to others, was gone. In his place was someone I was still getting to know, but who I liked better every day. Someone who could say no when necessary. Someone who demanded honesty in his relationships. Someone who understood the difference between being loved and being convenient. On my 67th birthday, Carol surprised me with a small party. Nothing elaborate, just a few friends from our hiking group and photography class. People who had come to know me as I actually was, rather than as the role I'd played for 40 years. As I looked around the table at these friends who asked nothing from me except companionship, who brought their own stories and laughter and perspectives to share, I realized something profound. For the first time in my adult life, I was surrounded by people who were there because they wanted to be, not because they needed something from me. That night, as Carol and I sat together on my back porch, she asked me a question that might have devastated me a year earlier. "Do you ever regret leaving Melissa?" I thought about it carefully. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that she felt she needed to deceive me rather than just being honest about what she wanted. But no, I don't regret leaving. Even after 40 years together? Those 40 years weren't what I thought they were. I was in love with an illusion, and she was in love with what I could provide. Neither of us was seeing the other clearly. And now, I looked at her, this woman who had her own life and chose to share parts of it with me, who paid her own way and expected me to pay mine, who was interested in my thoughts and feelings rather than my bank account. Now I know the difference between being needed and being wanted, and I'd rather be wanted. She smiled and took my hand. Good. Because you are. As I sit here now, 2 years after that devastating Saturday when I discovered the truth about my marriage, I can honestly say I've never been happier. Not because I enjoy seeing Melissa struggle, but because I'm finally living an authentic life based on honest relationships. I'm no longer the man who automatically says yes to every request, who measures his worth by how much he can give away, who accepts poor treatment because he's grateful to be tolerated. I'm Thomas. Just Thomas. And for the first time in 67 years, that's enough.